Again, we have with us Mr. William Powell as our guest to discuss the topic census. Why should we care, especially those of us who are immigrant? We're talking about the United States Census. And so he's here to answer some questions and we will be learning a lot. So those of you who always join us here at Focus on Liberia via Facebook Live, we'll ask you to share our show while we get ready to go into the conversation. Uh, Mr. Powell, you are our guest. Let know a little bit about you. What do you do?
Yes. Again, my name is William Powell, and I am a media specialist with the United States Census Bureau, specifically in the Atlanta region. The Atlanta region encompasses 7 states, including Georgia, Alabama, North and South Carolina, Florida, Mississippi, Louisiana. And so my job is specifically to provide media coverage for the state of Georgia. And I do shows like this to inform the public of how important the 2020 census is.
All right. Thank you very much. I think we got you the right guy to answer questions about the census thing. Dennis will tell you in his village at the time they started census, people are now willing to be counted because they were worried that they will tax them. But this time it might be different, but people might have some fear too. So our guest is set. Dennis, how do we start?
So, Paul, we say welcome to Focus on Liberia. This is our prime time show. We are glad to have you talk about census. As Sonny said, I was born in the remote part of Liberia, where when the census is coming, the whole town is empty. People are in the bushes for fear that counting them will make them pay taxes. So the best place for us to, so some of us even came to the United States still with that, some of that embedded in our subconscious. So for us to start, I want us to start from the place what census is not before we even go into census, so that you can allay my fears. What is census not about before we even go into census itself? That would be my first question.
Okay. The census is, first of all, it's not about taxes. It's not about immigration. It's not about your information even being shared with any government agency. The census is essentially just a once in a decade count of everyone living in the United States. And we collect the data for statistical purposes only. So it's not used for any other purpose than statistics.
Okay. So I shouldn't be afraid. They're not going to ask for my social security number. They're not going to ask for my bank account. Maybe they just want to know how many person there are in each state, maybe in each county. Is that what this is about?
Yes. So what will happen is an invitation will be sent into the mail to every household, every address in the United States. And we ask that those households self-respond to the census online, by phone, or by mail. What we're going to ask for is your name, your age, date of birth. We'll ask for your race. We'll ask for Hispanic origin. We'll ask for the number of people living in the household. And we ask that you fill out the information for everybody that lives in the household. We will not ask for your social security number. We will not ask for banking information. And, that was a lot of fear this past summer about the citizenship question being included on the census. And it will not. The census will not ask you about your citizenship status. And so it's perfectly safe. And again, your information can only be used for statistical purposes only.
Thank you, Mr. Power. And we want to welcome all our viewers from across the globe. This is a very important topic, and we have someone from the U.S. Census Bureau to talk about this. As he said, he's the media specialist, so this is part of his job to educate all of us on census. So we're going to be posting our call-in number very shortly. We also want you to post your questions on Facebook and get to know what this is all about. So share the video, get people to get involved so that we all learn about it. So let's get started this way. We already learned what census is not about. So trust me, I'm not going to run away this time and hide because I already understood what it's not about. So what is the 2020 census? Let's start from there.
Okay. The census, again, is a once a decade count of every person living and breathing in the United States, including children and babies. It's mandated by the Constitution. And the goal of the census is to count everyone once, only once, and in the United States. The first census was conducted in 1790 as U.S. Marshals went to each household and collected that data with their own pen and paper. We'll now fast forward to the 2020 census, and it's easier than ever. People can self-respond. Every household can self-respond online, by phone, or by mail. And we just want everyone to know that the census is perfectly safe, it's easy, and it's important. We can't share your information with any law enforcement, can't share it with immigration enforcement, can't share it with any federal agency. So it's important for everybody to respond and everybody to know that it's perfectly safe.
Right, right. Let's talk about the process. We talk about self-responding online and on phone. So am I expecting people to call me? What is the web? You say online. How do I do? So walk us through the entire process.
Well, let me just walk you through the entire process because this is a massive operation that requires years of planning, and even more than that, it requires thousands of people to complete the census. And so we start the process with address canvassing. Back in August, between August and October of 2019, individuals may have received a knock at the door from what we call our address canvassers, in which they were verifying addresses. So before we even send anything to anybody, we first have to establish where to count. And once we establish where to count, in other words, we compile a list of every address in the United States, and then we're able to send out those invitations. So starting in March, we'll begin to send out invitations for people to self-respond to the 2020 census, and that'll go to every household in the United States. From there, individuals will be invited to respond to the census online, by phone, or by mail. So when you get that invitation in the mail, it'll give you a link that's specific to your household, and you can go online and respond right there to the census. And then you don't have to worry about a census taker coming to your door, because that's our next operation. After we send the invitations out, we give people a chance to respond. Even more than that, if they don't respond, we send postcard reminders encouraging them to respond. With the last reminder, you'll receive a paper questionnaire in the mail with that reminder. So if you haven't responded online, you can respond by paper. But if individuals don't self-respond online, by phone, or by mail, then we will send census takers to those households that had not responded, which we call our non-response follow-up operation. So it's a massive operation, and it's important for people to understand that it's important to respond. Your response saves the government tax dollars, and that we don't have to deploy those census takers, but your response is also your civic duty. And so everybody counts, whether you're a citizen or non-citizen. Every single person counts. And even more than that, every single person can help. You can help us, first of all, again, by responding to the census. Make sure that your household and everyone in your household is counted. Even more than that, you can help us by spreading the word that the census is vitally important. It's important so that we can receive the federal dollars in our communities for vital services. Even more than that, it's important because state and district lines are drawn based upon that census data. And so you can help us spread the word about the importance. And then lastly, I will let individuals know that we are hiring. And so if you're looking for a job or opportunity to earn extra income, you can go to 2020census.gov/jobs. So our message is simple. The census is important, everyone counts, and everybody can get involved.
Thank you. Again, folks in cyberspace, indeed, you are watching Focus on Liberia. Yeah, Focus on Liberia. We educate, we elevate, and we promote all things Liberia. Today, we are trying to educate you, and we brought an educator, from the U.S. Census Bureau to educate all of us on census. So my question, what's the purpose of all this? Now you gather all this information. What do you do with this massive information and for what?
Yeah. Essentially, the census is all about money and power. In other words, census data is used to determine political power for each state and local communities. And it's also used to determine how federal funding is distributed to states and local communities. As it relates to funding, over $675 billion is distributed every year based upon census data. That money is used for vital services in your community. It's used for emergency medical services. It's used for housing, public housing. It's used for roads and bridges. It's used for schools and programs like Head Start. It's used for a plethora of things. In 2010, over 300 programs, federal programs, were funded in each community based upon census data. So if individuals aren't counted, then they decrease the likelihood of the funding that is needed for vital services in their community to flow into their community. But it's not only about money, it's about power. Census data is used to determine how many seats each state gets in Congress and the House of Representatives, but it is also used to redraw congressional districts, to redraw state and legislative districts, and even on a local level, it's used to redraw school districts. So the census is important because it's all about money and it's all about power.
Wow, I love the aspect about power.
Yeah, I love money.
And then it lost money. So let me talk about manpower, because I know when I get the power, I get the money. So let's talk about power. So you talk about a school districts, for example. So the information can be used if I'm in a school district, maybe we have limited schools, and based on the number of persons that in that particular district, they will be able to determine whether or not we need additional school. Is that correct?
Yeah. So it's important to understand, though, that the money and the power doesn't follow the need. Okay. It follows the numbers.
Okay.
So if census data supports a need in a community, the likelihood of that community receiving the census, receiving funding that is based upon census data in their community is higher. But say you have 1,000 people or 1,000 kids in a community, which calls for a new school, but only 100 kids are counted in the 2020 census. The decision makers are going to look at the census data and say, you know, this community doesn't justify, or the numbers doesn't justify a new school in this community. And so it's important, whether you're a citizen or non-citizen, for you to respond so that the numbers can support the needs in the community. So, and as it relates to power, again, you know, you want more people representing you in Congress. You want more people looking out for your interests in these government positions who are from your community and who work for your community. So it's important that everyone is counted so that you can have more representation in Congress and you can have more representation at the local level.
All right, let's talk about money. Danny doesn't want to talk about it, but I will talk about it. You said about 620 billion is being allotted to each state based on census statistics. Somebody who's an immigrant said, well, how do I get any of that money? I don't want to know about that. I don't think I'm going to get a dime. What do you say to that person?
Well, I would say to that person that every single one of us, if we're living on U.S. soil, we use some type of service that is funded based upon census numbers every single day. The roads that you drive on, you know, in order for those roads to be repaired, it requires money. And that money only flows into a state or to a local community if the numbers justify it. So the roads that you drive on, they affect your car. If you got a whole lot of potholes, you coming up with a whole lot of flat tires and problems with your suspension. But even more than that, emergency medical services. I understand that some immigrants or non-citizens aren't eligible for some social programs, but you are eligible for emergency medical services. And so the justification for those needs are based upon census numbers. Even more than that, public housing. So all of us, whether we're citizens or non-citizens, we use some services to some degree every single year, every single day, that decisions makers use census data to fund. And so if we're not counted, then the funding won't be there for those vital services that we use on a daily basis.
Where does this fear for census, and we are getting some positive feedback on Facebook. James Fasuku say quite enlightening, and he even shared his story, and his story is very similar to mine, where when the census is coming on a village, you see, he said his father, they will break down some of their houses because they don't want those houses to be counted because those were tied into taxes. How many? Because there was something called hot tax that was taxed in Liberia. Here in the United States, where does the fear of census or come from? Not just in the immigrant community, but also in the African American or other communities. Where does that come from?
Yeah. It comes from a variety of reasons, and it's really based upon individuals' experiences and backgrounds. A lot of people don't trust the government as a whole, or a lot of people fear, that their information will be disclosed to local authorities. But I'm here to reassure everyone that, and let me just say as well, that we understand that there's fear out there, that people participating in the census, they fear that they'll expose themselves or their families to harm. But let me just assure everyone that, again, the census has nothing to do with immigration or even law enforcement. In fact, the Census Bureau, by law, cannot share anyone's information with any federal agency or even law enforcement. Can't share it even with the court. Even if the President of the United States solicited the information by law cannot be shared even with the President of the United States. And so it's important for people to understand that your information is protected. For immigrants, I want to assure you, your information that you provide on the census questionnaire cannot be shared with Immigration and Customs Enforcement or ICE. And so your information is protected. In fact, every census employee, we take a legally binding lifetime oath to protect all census data. Should any census employee disclose any personal information or any census data that can personally identify an individual, they will be subject to up to 5 years in prison and a $250,000 fine. So the Census Bureau takes protecting information and data that we collect we treat it with the utmost importance. So we want to ensure everybody that you can be counted and you don't have to fear your information being shared with any law enforcement.
What kind of information does this census form ask for?
Yeah. So again, let me start off by saying what it doesn't ask for. It doesn't ask for your social security number. It doesn't ask for banking information. It doesn't ask for any personal identifiable information outside of your name. We do ask for your name. We ask for your age. We ask for your date of birth. We ask for your race, Hispanic origin. We ask for all the individuals that live in that household. And so we're just looking for that information, but we're not asking for any citizenship information. We're not asking for any social security information, anything that can compromise you. Again, it's just name, it's age, date of birth, race, Hispanic origin, and the number of people that live in your household. And so it's important for people to understand that, again, that it's safe, it's easy, and will protect your information.
Earlier this year, the president of the United States was pushing for that citizenship question. I know that was defeated or it's not going to take place. So what was the step taken to kind of refuse to do that? And what's the likelihood that that's not going to be maybe required again?
Yeah. So the Supreme Court actually heard the case, and the Supreme Court ruled that the citizenship question cannot be included. And even beyond that, the census forms have already been printed. And so the questions that are on the census form are the questions that are on the census form. The citizenship question cannot and will not be added to the questionnaire. And so, people don't have to fear about that question being answered or being asked. And again, people don't have to fear that any immigration or any law enforcement agency will come to their home based upon them filling out the census.
Thank you. And I want to know, how often is this census held and what can be the deadline?
I think that's a real important question because, again, as I stated before, the census is all about money and power. So when you think about it, census data is used to determine how much funding each state gets every year for the next 10 years. So in other words, we only have one shot per decade at this thing. So every person that's not counted equates to thousands of dollars that per person that your community will not receive for the next 10 years. So it's taken every 10 years. And once it's taken and we have the numbers are the numbers for the next 10 years. So we only have one shot this decade. So it's important that we get the count right and that everybody is counted. I will share with you, though, that the Census Bureau is always collecting data. Every year, we conduct what we call the American Community Survey. On the American Community Survey, we do ask for information about your job, about economics, and things of that nature. And those surveys are sent out every year to only 3.5 million households. But don't confuse the American Community Survey with the census, because again, the census is only every 10 years and it involves every person in the United States, whereas the American Community Survey only involves 3.5 million households per year. And even more than that is taken every year. And so the important thing that we're pushing right now, and we want people to understand, is that we got to get this count right for the 2020 census, because that affects money and power for the next 10 years.
Thank you. Dennis, if you don't mind, can you share that website again? Let him walk us through. If I want to get my census done online, where do I go? Just people to get a sense that when they get to the website, they know where to start from. So folks in cyberspace, we are trying to show you the United States Census Bureau website. Yeah, it is. So Powell, walk us through. You're looking at the website right there. I want to register my family, give my information as being asked. Where do I start from?
Well, the first place you start is you pull out that invitation that you get in the mail.
Okay.
When you get that invitation in the mail, it's going to have a link on there, okay, that you can go to and fill out your census. Okay. Because that link is actually going to be tied to your address. Okay. Not tied to your name. It's not tied to anybody in their household. It's tied to that address. And so we want you to go to that specific link so that you can put in your information for that address. Because again, we're looking to identify who lives at what household, and not, just collect your information just to be collecting your information. We want to know who lives where so that we can determine a political power and where the money flows. And so it's important that you go on that link specifically that is provided on your invitation. But I'm glad that you pull up the website, because there's a plethora of information All the questions that you have can be answered by visiting that website, and we encourage individuals to share it with others who need the information. Also, you can go to our website 2020census.gov/jobs, and that's where individuals can apply to work with the Census Bureau.
And if I receive a phone in the mail, and I know there are a number of questions, even though there may not be too many, why if I don't answer one or two, what happens?
Well, I will say by law, it is mandated that you answer all of the questions. One additional thing that'll be asked on the census is that the head of household provide their phone number. Just the head of household, or the main person who's filling out the census form. And that phone number is only so that we can follow up with you should you not answer all the questions. That's the only reason we use that phone number. Should you not answer all the questions on the census form, you may receive a call from a census employee seeking to gather that information. But we ask that everyone fill out all of the information and answer all of the questions on the census form.
So we can get that money.
So you can get that money.
And get power. Don't forget power.
Yes, sir.
I love power.
We from the immigrant community, we are so accustomed to filling out immigration forms, and most of the time we require the help of a lawyer. Do we need to contact a lawyer or anybody to help us fill out the census form?
Not at all. Doesn't require a lawyer. I will say that we know there are language barriers sometimes with immigrants. But on our website, we do provide 59 language guides that'll help individuals fill out the census. But a lawyer is not required to fill out the census because, again, your information cannot be used against you in any way whatsoever. It cannot be shared with any other agency or law enforcement. And again, we're just asking for your name, your age, your date of birth, your race, and your sex. I didn't mention that earlier. We are asking for your sex and even the number of people that live in that household. And everybody who lives in that household needs to be counted on that form as well. So we need their information, age, and all and things of that nature. But other than that, no additional information will be asked. And even more than that, and no lawyer is required to fill out the census. Again, it's safe, it's easy, and it's important.
Thank you.
As soon as you asked about deadline earlier, so if my information is not in up to what point, and you follow up if nothing is done, I don't know if you spoke about that deadline already, as to when I'm not going to get that in, because this is every 10 years.
Yeah. So what happens is, again, starting in March, between March 12th and the 20th, you'll receive an invitation in the mail with that link that I spoke of earlier, where you can respond online to the census. Come April, should you not respond to the census, you'll get a reminder postcard to respond. Later in April, if you have not responded, you'll receive another reminder letter or postcard along with a paper questionnaire to respond to the census. But come May 2020, for those households that have not responded, they will go through a process called non-response follow-up, where a census taker will knock on the door to gather that information. But to answer your question more specifically, the last day to respond to the census online is July 31st, 2020. So the last day to respond online is July 31st, 2020. But by that time, the likelihood of a census taker knocking on your door is very high. So if you don't want somebody coming to your door trying to gather that information from you, the easiest thing to do is just go online and respond to the census yourself.
And are there punitive measures for my friend Joe Blow, who doesn't let us fail in any form whatsoever? Is there a penalty for him?
Say that again?
Is there any penalty for any individual, especially my friend called Joe Blow, who does not like to fill out any form from the government? Is he going to be punished for not doing it at all?
It's a requirement by law to respond to the census.
Okay.
But there's no punitive thing in place to punish somebody. And so, the likelihood of somebody being punished for not responding to the census is 0 to none. But we do encourage everybody, because it's your civic duty to respond to the census. And again, it's perfectly safe, it's easy, and your information is protected. And so no one has to fear about filling out the census or not filling out the census. But yeah, again, it's so important to your community, and it's so important to the resources that you receive personally in your own community. So if you don't respond to the census, you're only hurting yourself, and you're hurting your community, and even beyond that, you're hurting your state, because the money that needs to be allocated for the services that you use is based upon the numbers. It's not based upon the need.
All right. Dennis, hold on. You talk about it being a civil responsibility. I know you were talking earlier again about, hey, if you don't do it, you deny your state, your community, and maybe yourself of some, services you should have benefited from. But I want you to go more. How would somebody understand more of a civil responsibility? How can you connect that for them to understand, oh yeah, this is my civil responsibility, I need to do it?
Mm-hmm. A lot of times when people think about civic responsibility, they're thinking about voting, right? But what differentiates the census from voting is you have to be 18 and you have to be a citizen to vote. To participate in the census, you just have to be living and breathing in the United States. You don't even have to be a citizen. Everyone counts. When you think about voting determines the individuals that represent us. And so it's important for us to fulfill our civic duty in voting. But the census determines the number of people that do represent us, the number of people that do represent our community. And so when you think about civic duty, it's about filling out the census to help your community, to help your state. It's about your children.
And to get that money.
And future generations. That's absolutely correct. Okay. Because again, the census affects the next 10 years. Even if you have a child that's perhaps 2 years old and is not in school, that child at some point over the next 10 years is going to be in school. And then the amount of funding that school gets for essential programs, school lunch programs, for after school programs, for Title I, that's determined based upon census data. And so it's so important for us to really think about this as a civic duty, because it really is, so that our communities, again, can get the funding it needs. Not just our communities, and not just thinking about ourselves, but future generations. The number of children that are going to be born over the next 10 years. It's so important. It's just as important as voting.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, if you are just joining us, this is Focus on Liberia. We are discussing Census 2020. Our guest, Mr. William Powell, he's the media specialist for the state of Georgia for the U.S. Census Bureau. And if you want to join the conversation, please call. The number is being posted, 605-313-6004. The code is 791403. Mr. Powell, about the future generation, that strike me. Because it's, if I don't do this for the next 10 years, my 2-year-old, or the one who's supposed to be qualified for Head Start, may not have that funding. So will it make sense to count pregnancies as well? Because the child is going to be born within the next few months. Do you take that into consideration?
No, you don't. Only individuals who are living and breathing come April 1st. So come April 1st, if the child is 1 hour old, they need to be counted. They need to be on the census form. But come April 1st, if the child is not born and is still in the womb, they do not get counted. And so we only count, and April 1st is just our reference date. When you receive the invitation in the mail in March, you can respond immediately. But if you respond at that point and the baby's not born, they can't be counted.
Let's talk about redistricting. And someone asked the question about elections. What the census have to do with both?
Yes. So state and local officials use census data, or in other words, census numbers and the population in different areas to determine how state and local district lines are drawn. And so when it comes to elections, that your district or the number of representatives that represent a state in an area can fluctuate based upon census numbers. As it relates to the House of Representatives, each state gets at least one representative. But some states get more representatives based upon the population. So, for example, California has a whole host of representatives in the House of Representatives because they have one of the largest populations, as opposed to a state like Mississippi. But it's important that everybody fill out their census because you can either gain a seat or lose a seat based upon the numbers. The more people that respond, you increase the likelihood of you getting, again, more political power, more people who represent you. Why do you want more people who represent your state? Because the people in Congress in Washington are going to be concerned about getting the funding and the resources that are needed for their state. And so, you want people in Washington who are advocating for your state and even your community. And the only way to get more representation, more voices in Congress that can speak for your community, is to ensure that everybody in a community is counted.
Thank you. Mr. Jal, let's read some comments. Let me start reading some comments here from our folks viewing us at Facebook. James Wright, Brother Jar, I'm enjoying your dance and the fine African attire. Is that from Africos?
No, the attire is from Liberia.
Okay, James again. True, our father had to break down some of the village huts for fear of the government taxing them. Let's see this one. Stanley, this informative and educational. My question, let me hit that. He said, my question is, will the 2020 census be used for the 2020 election? Will it affect the congressional district from each state in terms of 2020 general election for president and representatives? And I think so far, those are the ones that are captured. Dennis?
Yeah, William can respond to the question. I think he answered it, but you can go again. Stanley is saying, will the 2020 census be used for the 2020 elections? And how would that affect congressional districts?
That's actually a very good question. The 2020 census will not be used for the 2020 elections. The census data that we collect for the 2020 census will not be delivered, and it's mandated by the Constitution that it be delivered to the President of the United States and Congress by December 31st of 2020. So the final results won't be codified until the end of the year. And then even beyond that, the census data won't be used to redraw district lines and begin that process and deliver to the decision makers until 2021. And so the census data that we collect will not affect the state, local, and the congressional districts for the 2020 elections.
So in terms of all this sensor data, give me a sense of what is a good sensor and what is a bad sensor after it's all done in terms of
Well,
the numbers.
yeah, our goal is to count everyone.
Okay.
We're looking for 100% count. But what we identify as low response areas is states that have a 25 to 30% or above non-response rate. So in other words, for a particular community, if there's 25 to 25% or higher number of people who have not responded to the census, we consider that a low response area. Those are the areas where we sent out the forms, people didn't respond. Those are areas where we sent out census takers and individuals didn't respond. Well, our goal is always 100%. And we believe that with the census being made more simple, and even more than that, us having the shortest form in history, we believe that we're going to increase that rate. We believe that more people will respond because we've made the census easy for people to self-respond, especially with it being online.
Talking about non-responders, let's look at the pattern since the United States been conducting the census in terms of demographics. What will you say? Some demographics respond more compared to others, sometimes has been the case with other statistics?
Yes, certainly. We find that there are certain communities that are less likely to respond. We mentioned some of them already: the immigrant community, the refugee community, and even minority communities, African American communities, Asian communities, Hispanic communities. One of the biggest undercounted people group is children under 5. People need to understand that your children need to be on that census form. Even babies, as I stated earlier, if your child is only a day old, they need to be counted on the census. And so we want people to understand that, although you may have a lens through which your experience tells you that the census is bad, please understand, again, that it is safe. You are protected by law. Your information cannot be shared with any federal agency and cannot be shared with law enforcement. And so it's perfectly safe for you to go online, for you to respond by phone or even by mail to the 2020 census.
What has been the impact of those kind of low response areas? From your experience, also from statistics, you see them very poor, impoverished because they've not been responding to census. What has the impact been?
To be quite and to be above board, you can go into the communities and see which communities have a high response rate and which communities have a low response rate. You can just see it by the quality of the roads. You can see it by the quality of the sidewalks. You can even see it by the number of businesses in a community, because businesses use census data to determine where they place their places of establishment. So it's not just about, funding for social programs, it's about jobs too. Because if you have an area that's highly populated, businesses are more likely to establish themselves in those areas and therefore bring jobs. And so you can just ride through different communities and see which communities are receiving the funding and which communities aren't. And so it's important that people understand that. And if you want to see a difference in your community, you can do your part by filling out the census.
You have examples of those such communities?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, I can say that, when you look at communities that have a high poverty rate, when you look at communities where, there are thousands of kids in a school, our schools are overpopulated. When you look at communities where there are a low number of jobs that are available, those are communities that likely have a low response rate to the census. And so, again, it's important for people to understand that it's not just a form that you're filling out, it's help that you provide into your community.
And because some of us, especially from minority communities, we look at this as, oh, okay, this is discrimination. The schools are not funded. You can tell from these areas, but I have no idea that this is well, kind of linked to census. We blame that oftentimes on racism. Are we wrong?
Yeah. A lot of times we attribute, and I was listening to a sermon by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. The other day, and he referenced going into a community in Mississippi, and noticing the economic and social disparities. Now, don't get me wrong. During his time, there were that racism and socioeconomic factors contributed to why certain communities were the way they are. But even as I was listening to that, I was wondering, what was the response rate for that community as it relates to the census? How many people in that community, first of all, knew about the census? Second of all, knew about the importance of the census. And third of all, actually completed the census. Because the programs that you lack and the programs that are needed in your community, people who make decisions about those programs and how much funding you get for those programs are going to use census data to determine that. And again, it's not based upon what the eye can see. It's not based upon the need. It's based upon the numbers. And so it's important for every household to respond. And not only that, tell your neighbors, tell the people that you worship with, tell the people that you work with to respond to the census so that your community can get the money it needs for the vital services that are needed in the community.
And in terms of you in the area of communication and outreach, to get people informed about this civil duty, besides coming to us here, maybe on the news, social media is here. What are the tools and mediums you're using to get the information out to people as much as possible so that they can fill in that fund and get that money and get more power?
Yeah. Well, we have a program called the Partnership Engagement Program. Mm-hmm. And so in 2016, the Atlanta region, we hired our first partnership specialist. Okay. And then we ramped up our partnership staff come 2019. The role of the partnership specialist is to reach out to local organizations, nonprofits, also reach out to state and local officials to inform them and educate them on the importance of the census. Why do we reach out to them? Why do we reach out to nonprofits and local agencies and even places of worship? Why do we reach out to schools? Because these are the trusted voices in the community. These are the individuals who can motivate people to respond. These are the individuals who have that trust in the community that people will listen to them and they will hear from them that it's important to respond to the census. And so we've been educating individuals for well over a year about the importance of the census. And we've been at events, we've been at community rallies, we've been at festivals all across the state and even across our region, educating and motivating people to respond. Well, also we actually have a paid media campaign in which you'll see census ads running on television. You'll hear census ads running on radio. We have a social media presence where we're pushing things via social media, and we're also utilizing our partners that we've established in the community to create PSAs, to create social media campaigns, because a lot of times what's also important is the nonprofits, they depend upon census data as well, because the people that they serve, they need money to serve them. And a lot of times they receive federal grants. But if the numbers don't support the need in a community, the likelihood of those nonprofits receiving those federal grants is lowered. And so we're employing every means that in which we can think of to get the word out that the census is here and that it's important and that everybody needs to respond.
All right.
There's a question here on Facebook. I know you cover some of these things. Some are joining us, so they may, it's like asking us to repeat, but let me read them anyway. Man Janka's son Del Perro said, how is the census report used in determining the unemployment rate? Then to Kilby Mike said, please discuss the benefits of censuses so viewers can understand the importance. And he's calling from Ghana.
Okay. As it relates to the employment rate, census data is not used to determine the employment rate because we don't ask that question. I mentioned earlier that we do conduct what's called an American Community Survey. That's where we gather housing and economic and demographic data about communities, and that's conducted every year. We send that survey out to 3.5 million households every year, and we use that, which asks those questions to collect data on the nation's people, places, and economy. However, the census will not ask questions as it relates to employment. The census asks questions as it relates to your name, your age, your sex, your race, your Hispanic origin, and it asks the number of people that are living in your household. So we don't use census data to collect information on employment. However, we do use census data to determine how many states, how many seats each state gets in Congress, and even more than that, census data is used by decision makers to determine how much funding is flows into each community. Over $675 billion is distributed every single year for social programs, for social services, for hospitals, for schools, for roads, things that we use every day in our community. So it's important that we fill it out because the census, again, like I mentioned earlier, is all about money and it's about power.
And I like when you mentioned about the businesses, because they use these market analysis to determine where to put their business. So for people like the businesses and even me, where can we find that census data so that we can use it too to see, which area had more people, so that if I have a business, I can use that as well.
Yeah. Again, before I even answer that question, let me state that the data we collect is used for statistical purposes only. So we will not disclose anybody's personal information. We just use it to collect statistics. And those statistics are published on our website. And so individuals can go to census.gov if they need to gather more information. We also have a tool called the Roam tool that you can use to gather information specifically about certain tracts in your community, what we call census tracts, which are blocks of people. And so if a business or a nonprofit is looking for that information, they should go to our website, census.gov.
Thank you. And coming back to civil duty again, I think taking a job with the Census Bureau, maybe the part-time job, is another way you can show your civil duty to not only yourself, your community, your state, and the country. And this time you get pay, isn't it?
Yes, that's an excellent point. We want people to know that the undertaking of the census is a massive operation and it requires thousands of people. And one of the reasons we need thousands of people is for that non-response follow-up. We also hired thousands of people in last year to do address canvassing for us. But again, we understand that there may be households that do not respond or self-respond to the census online, by phone, or by mail. And so we deploy people into the field called census takers to knock on doors and to gather that information. The great thing about the jobs that we offer is that we offer competitive pay, we offer weekly pay, Even for the mileage that you drive to get to the different locations and between locations, we reimburse you 57 cents a mile. And so it's a great opportunity to make extra money. And it's also a great opportunity to put that you work for the federal government on your resume. And so we encourage people, if you're looking for a job, if you're looking for extra income, go to 2020census.gov/jobs and apply.
And what's the pay rate?
The pay rate is actually based upon where you live. It's based upon your county. And actually, you can go online to 2020census.gov/jobs and look up the pay rate for your particular county. And, in Fulton County, for example, we pay anywhere from $17 to $24 an hour. And so we offer competitive pay. Again, it's weekly pay, and it's a great opportunity to earn some extra income.
All right, folks in cyberspace, again, you are watching Focus on Liberia, the only network that educate, that elevate, and promote all things Liberia. We are in the educational sector, and this time we are talking census, so you can know what census is all about, especially Census 2020. They're not asking for your social security number. They just want to know how many person in your community, in your state, and in the country, so that they can decide how much you receive in your community to support your community. That is all it's about. And we are happy we have somebody from the Census Bureau to share all this information with us. Powell?
Yes.
I think we have covered a lot. And is there anything we missed that you want to touch on?
Well, I would just say that as relates to the census, we understand that there are language barriers out there. But again, there are on our website 50 language guides in 59 languages where people can receive assistance to fill out the form. Also, you can call in, and we offer 12 different languages in which people can speak to someone and have that census form filled out. But again, I just want to reiterate, census is all about money and power. And you can't get the support that you need and the resources that you need in your community unless you participate. It's the one operation in the United States where everybody counts. So count everybody in your household, from the oldest person even to the babies. Count everyone on that census form so that you can do your civic duty and ensure that your community gets the representation and the funding it needs for the next 10 years.
All right, thank you. We have our correspondent, our West African correspondent, Edward Amara, based in Freetown, Sierra Leone, who's just joined us. Edward, we're talking about census, and we have Mr. William Powell from the U.S. Census Bureau trying to explain to us all about census, especially Census 2020. And from the start of the show, Dennis had to run from his village just so that he would not be counted, for fear that he might get taxed. And you in Freetown, share a little story with us, how people react to census.
Thank you very much. Good evening. It's been a long time since I've been away in this program because of my studies, but I am hopeful to be back tonight. That is why I decided to join in. Is the census in Sierra Leone, like in other West African countries, a very sensitive issue, because normally, like here, census is conducted in every 1 decade or any 10 years, so that it actually helps the government in power to determine in time of development, because census actually conducted here on a holistic basis. Like when they are conducting census in Sierra Leone, they take in account every domestic things that is within the country in terms of human counts, material resources, everything that is available in terms of domestic development. So when the government in power have an adequate and reliable information of the type of census that is being conducted, it is based on that particular census report that they draw up developmental process or programs, and they know where the government should invest in time of the new financial year that may start. However, because of the type of political propaganda that we have in Africa, Normally, instead of you getting the accurate, reliable information, they tend to supply with information that may definitely not portray the type of image that the country needs. We witnessed that in the 2018 election in Sierra Leone. Normally, when census are being conducted, we vet the country to know exactly what is into this country, what are they lacking, because census in Sierra Leone, I said initially, it's not just conducted on him account. Rather, they ask for each and every development that the country has. It is based on those census. You table the reporting to Parliament. The government will be in position to make any developmental program or draw us anything that they think that it will be needed to help the country to progress. But we had census in 2015, and in 2015, the result that the result that the enumerators gave out of the census never correspond to what the country needed. They went and inflicted some reports about in the north and in some part of Freetown, trying to tell us about the number of people that we actually, when in reality, they were not definitely existent. So census is normally conducted here to vet the development that we have, what we need, and what are some of the plans that we need to put in place, as long as it is being done on objective basis. So these are some of the problems that the government in power normally face. Like each and every government that comes into power, they tend to manipulate the census result to prove as if they have a stronghold, they have the larger number of supporters and one or two things. These are some of the problems. But census is a fantastic move because report the country to the people, also the people to the country, tell you exactly what happened, but it's very sensitive and it's something. Again, the type of publicity of census and how they sensitize people, because some people, even when it is time for census, they hardly come around to make their head count because they think they trivialize the matter and they are not au fait or not well or adequately informed about how the census may have a concomitant impact in a negative or positive way if they fail to be counted. So the most important thing is if the government want to do the census, let it inform the people and tell them the necessity of the census before ever embarking on the law. Else, the common man may think that it is not a necessity and they are not going to be counted.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Amara, and good to see you back.
Thank you, Dennis.
All right.
Yeah, thank you.
So,
Mr. Win or Powell, sorry.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. So, Mr. Powell, Edward Amara is our correspondent from Freetown, and he get us some fresh updates from the motherland. So, Mr. Powell, I think we've covered everything. We want to thank you so much for being here with us. I know this is something that a lot of people, as you said, we don't respond to. So it looked like we can do this again.
Yes, sir. Well, let me just say thank you for having me on, and we greatly appreciate all that you're doing to make people aware that the census is safe, that it's here, and it's almost time to respond, and that everybody counts. So thank you again for all that you're doing to get the word out.
Thank you. And if you have some of your ads to get our people informed, send them here. Maybe, not maybe, we will add them for you so that our people can get to know that the census is important and they need to participate.
Yes, yes, sir. I will send you a link to our YouTube page, and where we have a whole host of PSAs for different communities. So I'll send that to you, and we would greatly appreciate it if you'll share it with your audience.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Have a good one.
All right, folks, in cyberspace, we have come to the end of our broadcast. To our followers, we want to say always thank you for joining us here at Focus on Liberia, where we come to educate and elevate and promote all things Liberia. Mr. Jar.
And we'll all say good night and God bless you. Bye-bye.